Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 4 of Mind Over Music. This is our last session of this mini symposium. Thank you again for coming. It's been such a great 4 days, just so enlightening. We've had some incredible guests, and it's been such a pleasure to see all of you here. A big thank you as well to our online audience for tuning in on Idagio or through Honens. We've had some fantastic viewership digitally as well. So it's just been a real pleasure to see this come together as it has. I'd also like to thank the Azrieli Foundation for their incredibly generous support. Without it, this wouldn't be happening. And also, of course, the University of Calgary and the Hotchkiss Brain Institute, who really helped us put this all together. Today is a slightly different kind of event than we've had so far. It is a mental skills workshop. Many of you were either here or tuned into our Friday event called The Cognitive Competitor, where we discussed the question of performance psychology and stress management from a much more conceptual standpoint. Today, we are revisiting these themes with a much more practical orientation. We shall be discussing 5 key areas with tips, practices, and suggestions on how to best deal with each. What I'd like to note is that these tips are not just for performing artists or athletes. It's for all of us, for any kinds of situations that life throws at us. We can apply these to preparing for a presentation, maybe a job interview, perhaps a visit to the doctor that we're a bit worried about, or a difficult conversation we need to have. What I hope is that you'll be able to take away from this event lots of helpful suggestions, approaches, and tips that you can apply to your own life. I am so thrilled to share that today I will be joined here on stage by the legendary Cal Botterill. Those of you who were here on Friday will already be familiar with his work and will have heard much of Cal's wisdom. But for those of you who are new here, I will once again briefly describe his incredible career. Cal is a veteran in the field of sports psychology and was a force behind many of Canada's Olympic medal successes, having worked with Canada's athletes at 10 different Olympic Games. At the 2014 Olympics, for example, 7 of the 14 athletes that Cal worked with won gold medals. After playing for Canada's national men's hockey team, Cal received his PhD from the University of Alberta and then taught sports psychology at the University of Winnipeg for many years. He's won awards for excellence in teaching, is the author of several books on performance psychology. You might have spied some of them back there. And in 2016 was inducted into the Manitoba Sports Hall of Fame. I'm so thrilled that Cal came over from Winnipeg to be with us here this week. So please welcome Cal Botterill. How are you, Cal?
I am great. Nicolas, how about you?
Great, and excited to see the responses we've had to this symposium. It's the first time we've done anything like this with Honens, and to me this is such a fascinating area of research and exploration, music and the mind from various angles. So this has really been a celebration of this whole area of interest, and I'm so glad that so many people have come out to see the event and tune in online. The responses we had to our discussion on Friday were amazing. Many minds were blown. So I'm looking forward to having more of the same today. Cal, the 5 topics we'll be addressing today are relaxation, mental practice, pre-performance conditioning, thoughts and emotions, and finally, recovery and resetting. So how about we just dive into the first topic, relaxation?
Let's go. Let's go.
I'm curious, how many of you have a dedicated technique or activity to relax? Something that you reliably go to if you're in need of winding down? Yeah. It doesn't have to be like meditation or, if there's a favorite, composer you listen to or something, but something that is, you have an A input and a B output. You have a clear protocol for relaxing. Just the smattering of hands around? Yeah. I think, given the hesitation, I think we can improve on this. I think we can improve on this. How many of you have ever meditated before? All of you who were here on Thursday, definitely have. How many of you do so regularly? We can also improve on that. Anyway, Cal, this is such an important topic, and I think in any high-performance field, we tend to be so oriented towards productivity and just trying to get as much as we can out of the hours that we have, but we don't often think enough about the process of relaxation and getting into a space where we can condition ourselves to perform as well as we can. How have you seen the dynamics and the relationship towards relaxation change over your career? Has there been more awareness coming to this field in recent decades?
Well, most importantly, it's more important now than it's ever been. Jobs are more demanding. Life is more demanding. Mm-hmm. And I see a decline in people's personal space, and that's when you used to find ways to relax. For me, it's nature. I grew up on a farm. And then, I thought about how important this was and tried to convince people on it. And then I had the ultimate teachers. As I got to travel around and worked with professional athletes and Olympic athletes, one of the things I maintained doing was a growth and development class for my students at University of Winnipeg, and we did a daycare session of 6 weeks for 3 to 5-year-old children. If you want to meet people that can relax, come back to that. From spoiled brat people getting a lot of money and a lot of prestige to a little guy coming in looking kind of tense, I said, what's wrong? Oh, it's tough in the daycare. Stuff going on there. I said, really? Yeah. Well, come on. Let's relax here or whatever. Why don't you sit down for a second and just take a deep, breath from your tummy and exhale and feel all the tension go out of your fingertips and your feet. You go, I thought he was going to melt into the floor. I said, well, what are you at now? You said you were 100 on the tension. 6. I know no adult that can do that. I know no. So we studied in Sweden at one stage, and they were teaching. They called it teaching children mental skills. You don't have to teach them. You just have to help them maintain them. They're incredibly creative, perceptive, and that was an example, If the other kid comes in and he looks tired, let's see. Aha, you got your high-speed shoes on. Yeah, you want to see? Yeah, great. He's ready to go. Same thing. He went from 100, 5 on the fatigue scale to right off scale with one word, high-speed shoes. And 5 to 10, 15 seconds of activity. So we're capable of relaxing and energizing, and both are important. And in high performance, it's not one or the other. That's something you got to get figured out real early. It's both. The top performance, ideal performance state is highly energized, incredibly relaxed. And when I watched the performance here of that we went on Tuesday when we were here with Adam, I watched him really closely, and I just said, wow. I'm just kind of watching. I watched his presence as he came in and the way he handled himself and whatever. And the more I watched this artist, I saw an athlete. The way he presented, and nice exhale before he started, a nice pause before some breaks in his performance, and oh my, those hands. And I heard the doctors all say, you got to have great hands, but it's fingers. His fingers are amazing, absolutely amazing. Try doing a tap test. See how fast you can do it. If you got tension in your finger, you can only go so fast. Antagonistic muscle interfere with flow and speed. So to do what he did, you have to have relaxed fingers. So I think performing arts have been special for me. I haven't done a ton of time, but the time I've had in it has been really special. And I had a great experience with figure skating early at the Olympics, and it has a lot in common. But the bottom line is, and we can demonstrate a couple of things here, but if you want to start, if your hands, you got to have hands, and in his case, toes. I have a CD tape that I sometimes listen to when I have been tardy and I haven't relaxed lately. Very complete. It walks you through every muscle in your body becoming relaxed and whatever. And then about halfway it starts telling you, Can you feel the tingling in your feet? Can you feel the tingling in your hands? God, yes, I can. Whether it's a suggestion or it's real, I don't know, but it's happening. So now, if you're a pianist, you might say, well, what do you do? Some finger exercises? You want to put your hands in hot water? I'd start with core relaxation, because in order to stretch, you have to relax. The diaphragm is one of the most powerful muscles in our body. And when you go straight and exhale, it relaxes. And what does it do to the rest of the body? I mean, all the major muscle groups around it start to let go. Because our body is a chain, and it moves down the chains through muscles and tendons towards your extremities, and then eventually to your fingers and your hands. So I don't always do, 27 stretches. I do 2 or 3 core ones. And I feel now the effect throughout my whole body. And I feel the tingling and the circulation in my fingers, which is what it is that makes a difference. And it was all hands at first. Then I thought, oh my God, I'm watching his feet. He has to have his feet ready too, Wow. So I'm learning lots here.
Well, definitely one has to have a very holistic approach. And it's interesting what you say about very young children, because I don't know if anyone here has had experience with Alexander technique, for example. It's something that's very popular in the performing arts. And one of the theories there as well is that if you look at young babies, they move perfectly well. Yeah. And it is only after we start sitting at desks in schools that our body starts to go out of sync. So much of what we do is actually to try to regain the effortlessness that we actually once had. Yeah. So shall we start demonstrating a couple of techniques?
Yeah, I think we should, though. I guess the one comment I would make is that, it's... we do it to ourselves, but the world does it to us too. It's too much cognitive. Cognitive has produced great things in the world. It's an attribute, an asset, but in excess, it's a huge problem for health and high performance. The best performers are incredibly perceptive, and the performing artists that I've been associated with are better than the population of athletes that I deal with. Because most of it is coaches yelling words at them or whatever. And they got to turn the words into images and then the feeling of the images. And so and same with, imagine having to learn everything a doctor's supposed to know. Oh my God, if you don't turn that into something manageable, you're going to be totally overloaded almost all the time. And when I studied medical error, I found most of it is perceptual. It's not cognitive. They're bright enough, but they miss the heart rate, or they miss blood pressure. So I think that we do these things to ourselves, and we don't realize how important it is to find ways to stay relaxed and stay at it. And this gentleman over here was saying, and we got to be reminded. I said, yeah, as we get more sophisticated, we think we're getting more sophisticated from age 6 on. Those students I had are losing it. It's more sophisticated, more complicated, more cognitive all the time. And yet when I study growth and development literature, one domain's been neglected very badly. We have physical, motor, cognitive, and affective. All kinds of stuff happening in education. Perception, which might be the most important one, almost totally neglected. And there's one approach to kinesiology that teaches body awareness, effort awareness, space awareness, and relationship awareness. You got those, you're a performer. And it's not taught, it's not experienced. And they don't do enough simulation in medicine to put all that knowledge together and turn it into performance. So yeah, I think it's...
I keep beating on the drum of mindfulness, but that's really where, this idea of creating more body awareness and, just that presence and concentration really comes in the field of perception. So...
Yeah. No, I'll demonstrate a simple relaxation technique to facilitate the response that we're looking for. But I want to just say up front, he asked, and you all have different ideas. There's 100, there's 1,000 ways to relax. The important thing is to know what it can do for you and be creative enough to stay with it and maintain the things that are there. I mean, if you don't stretch regularly, your range of motion drops, your circulation gets poorer, your perception starts to dissipate. So whether you're an athlete or not, you should stretch a bit, But most of the people, even some of the elite athletes I work with, don't know how to stretch. They just strain. They go to full range of motion and they hit the reflex point, and that's the tipping point. And what they do is just torque it further. Oh yeah, I got to go further with that. Tell me that's good for you. That's the opposite of what you want to get. That's going to cause tension, inflammation, shortening of your range of motion, things like that. And over a long period of time with neglect. We had a young basketball player at camp was starting to get more injuries, was struggling with his performance. They tested him. He was at the 20th percentile in the general population for flexibility. We started to do this stretch relax thing that I'm going to show you. And in 10 days, he was at the 80th percentile. So it's in us, but you got to talk to your body. You got to do some things with it to get a stretch. Otherwise, you're just straining it. And it's not a healthy thing to do. So you're going to say, what's happening next here, you know? And I said, well, we're going to see if we can show you what it can do.
Those of you that would like to stand up and follow along, please do. If you'd rather be in your chair, you can also do so, whatever works best.
I'm older. I like to lay down. You know,
oh, okay. If you'd like to lie down, that's also fine.
Okay.
I'll be here just to make sure everything's okay.
So is my mic still working?
Yes,
and you can,
yeah,
and you
we can hear you loud and clear.
And you can do this with any stretch, but I'm going to show you just the two that I do pretty regularly, and they're core stretches because I find this extended effect when I do them. So the first one is just to take, bring your knee up towards your chest, and I hope my mic's still working, but
it's great.
And you only get so far, and you'll start to hit the stretch point. Like I'm pretty old, so that's about as far as you get until that's where.
That's pretty good.
That's where my body is telling me you got to stop. Now it's trying to protect my joints and my muscles, so you got to talk to it. You got to let it go, because you can do better than that. And so, if I exhale and take a deep breath when it's at that stretch point. So what happened? In a few seconds, I got like this much range of motion. Circulation certainly improves when you do that. So it's a pretty important thing. And then you start to feel, what are you dealing with here? You're dealing with hamstrings, which are often an issue for health and injuries. You've got a hip joint that needs to be mobilized a little bit because all those big muscles attached to it. There's lower back, which for me is a priority all the time. And there's your butt. So it's a pretty big deal, you know. So when I go this far then, it's already further than it was. Now, the thing's still in the way. I got to talk to the reflex. And when you have a reflex that's saying, that's enough, you got to talk to it. So I got to press against my hands with about 5 to 10 pounds of pressure. That's all it takes.
So you're pressing against your hands.
Against my hands, yeah. And then I exhale, combine the two things, and my shoulder goes closer and closer to
my head's always above the ground, off the ground.
Yeah.
What do you mean you're pressing against your hands?
Yeah, going.
Using the hands to pull your
Because that's what, it's in a position to pull, but you can push against them. And by pushing against them, that's what releases the reflex. It says, I trust you now.
The reflex that's tightening up now.
The reflex, I go that way, it releases the tension, and now it relaxes and goes further. Trust me again, and it goes further. Trust me again, it goes further. I had an athlete who said, my God, I have never had that good a stretch in my life. So it's amazing, you know, what's going on there and how important it is to do, you know, once a day or a few times. And, you know, when you're before performance is important. When you do it after performance, it's even easier. Your body's fired up and wired, and it's a great time to get recovery, especially if you're doing 65-minute performances or whatever. You got another one the next day. I mean, the more you can get that kind of relaxation response, the better it goes. And so, and here's one that is my favorite, is just this one here, which again goes across this way. And again, it's the same groups of muscles, but it's a a kind of a cross thing that really helps you.
My bottle here is a little pillow, if that helps. I don't know. It's not enough, actually. I should try to find.
Nicholas is unbelievable. He's ready for anything. So here it is again. So you get here, and you can do this in the bathtub with hot water. I mean, it's awesome, if you have a decent sized tub. So don't worry about your head. It can be down or up. But you get to here, and that's the stretch bar. I can feel it right across here. Now, take a breath. Now I press back up against my hand. It goes further. So I think you see a pretty dramatic effect. Now I want to ask you, I do that on both sides. That amounts to probably 20 or 24 deep breaths or releases. What happens now for Adam when he's ready? And he takes that. What happens to that ability to relax with one breath when you do that every day or 4 times a week or whatever? You produced, with a combination of a reflex release, incredible new state of relaxation in your body. And it's going to help you with an immediate performance, and for a lot of us over life, it's going to make a big difference in how active we're able to stay and how healthy we are, how many injuries we end up getting or whatever. I'm appalled that I took kinesiology, and that's what sensitized me, all this interdisciplinary stuff, but I have to show the trainers on almost all the teams that I work with how to do that and how for them to train the athletes. They had 4 years of training, and I thought they were biophysical, and it's not being done as much as it should. So I think it's a really important example that, the hardest thing now with presenting to athletes is they've heard about relaxation, they've heard about visualization, they've had some minimal experience with it, and they say, oh, I do that. Yeah, you do it, but you really don't do it. You're just straining there. When you're doing visualization, you're just doing something in your mind. It's not with any feeling. Like, they're not even close to the potential of some of these concepts in helping them prepare, perform, and recover.
I think one of the things you were describing here is creating a neural pathway, and this is something we were discussing over the past couple of days as well, an association between a certain kind of breathing, for example, and a certain kind of physiological response. If you establish a clear connection between the two through sufficient repetition, then all you need is a couple of breaths to access that place. And so if you are, let's say, on stage or before a phone call, you don't need to be doing all of the stretches. Just a couple of those breaths will get you into that state. And the other important thing to note here is that, of course, this idea, and I think some of the most important ideas that you were discussing were timing with the exhalation for the release, and also this idea of the pairing of the pressure against and then the motion inward to open up the stopping reflex is something you can apply to any stretch in the body. It's not just to these two, of course, but if you're stretching your neck or your hands, any part of the body, you can apply these principles to, and that will really open up the stretching process much more than doing it in a very static way.
And I couldn't wait to do that for Nicholas, because I listened to him and Jaideep the other day talking about plasticity. So I'm going to show you plasticity. What did I show you? Plasticity of the body. It's both mental, what you do, and it's physiological or physical. And it created a new level of function in your body in a few seconds.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, yeah.
One more thing I would note about relaxation before we go on to the next topic is, do we all know how to breathe? I mean, we think we do. But this is something that we can often get very wrong, and there are so many ways to go about this. But if you're ever not so in tune with your body and you are not always sure, one very easy thing to do is you can always put one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly. And let's say if your right hand is on your belly, only your right hand should really be moving when you're breathing. It shouldn't be coming in that much up in the chest. If it does, only maybe a little at the end of the breath, but most of it should be going into the abdomen. That is the kind of breathing that will stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. When you are anxious, you get this kind of chest breathing and very short as well. But if you consciously let the breathing slow down and also go deeper in, that will stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. One thing you can also imagine, don't feel like you're sucking the air in, but you can imagine that you have a kind of belt of noses, that you're wearing a belt of noses, and as if the air is just gently coming in from right there, not coming through your, esophagus and going all the way down there, but just very gently coming in from there. And that kind of visualization can really relax the breathing process and make it much more natural. So this is just another thing that is good to keep in mind. And doing that kind of abdominal breathing along with these kinds of stretches it's a great combination.
And could you ever believe that we have to be reminded to breathe?
I know, it's just...
There's one thing I want to tell you about what we just did. If there's a spasm in your diaphragm, you're in big trouble. It's an autonomic response. But we have this privilege of manipulating how we breathe. And as soon as you do a large breath, it produces relaxation. It has to accomplish it. But I had a football player come into my office one time. He said he was hyperventilating and just ran off the scale. And we had to get him to slow down his breathing rate so that he got some oxygen in there. Strange effect.
Because the thing why breathing is also so powerful is it is the only, perhaps, automatic function of the body that we also have conscious control over.
Yeah.
We can influence our digestion, but we do not control our digestion. We can influence our heart rate, but we cannot, in the snap of a finger, just make our heart rate shoot down, unless with medication or something like that. But breathing is something that will happen if you don't think about it, but it's something that we can change if we do think about it. And breathing is just a highway to so many different things in the body that we can affect. So really paying more attention to this is the first step in getting anywhere in high performance. Let's now move to mental practice and visualization, imagery. And when we think about this, we shouldn't only think about it in a very narrow way. Sometimes when we talk about visualization or imagery, people think that it's only visual, but it should also be auditory, kinesthetic. We're talking about evoking an experience in every way. One really important thing to know about the brain is that from a neurological standpoint, the brain has a very difficult time distinguishing between something you're doing and something you're imagining very vividly. It will initiate many of the same neural and motor pathways. So one thing I might do in my mental practice, I might actually rehearse playing something that I have not yet practiced very much, and I trick my brain into thinking I can actually do something that I can't do yet without spending hours and hours at the piano. Because I might play, let's say, a passage very slowly, so I know what it feels like to play it correctly. And then I speed that up in my head with the bird's eye view of the keyboard, looking in my head at what it would look like to play this passage perfectly, hearing how I want it to sound, and feeling in my fingers, evoking internally how it would feel if I were to do this the way I want it to be done. And if you repeat that, your brain starts to think that, oh, you're actually doing this. And then you go to the instrument and it's there without having spent hours and hours hammering away at the piano. This is a very, very powerful concept. Yet, I think in the performing arts and in music, we are so far behind because music is a very cerebral activity, but this idea of mental practice is so little known. Yet you see runners, and you think, oh, what's so special about running in a straight line? Well, they are spending hours upon hours each day doing this kind of mental practice, imagining the muscle movements, how they are springing off the ground, propelling their bodies forward. So you can really get very granular and imagine the whole process in a lot of detail. And this is something that's very powerful.
And the common term is rehearsal. But it's not rehearsal, it's real. It's real if it's any good to you. If it's not real, it's not going to be much help. So there's so much. I was part of a production of a video 40 years ago. We got a catchy title from Flip Wilson's comedy thing. It says, "What you see is what you get." I love the title. But we knew very quickly after we did it and talked to elite athletes that what he said is true. It's multi-sensory doing this well. And the two things for me I found over time were it had to be kinesthetic, I had to be doing it physically, and it had to be emotional.
Yeah.
I had to be feeling the emotions that I would feel in that moment. And here's one of the parts of emotion we're going to talk a bit about later that's so important is to be prepared for feelings. Because in the end, what are you going to do about them? You've got 7 of the most basic feelings, and you experience most of them every day, and we struggle with a lot of them. But if you accept feelings and you prepare for them, it's no big deal, you know? So I think and so the second thing that for me really works is I came here early to get to see this room.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can't get there, can you take a picture?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because now my real performance in my mind is in the real venue. And I'm ready to go. And I had the feeling at a major presentation at a conference in Williamsburg, and it just felt like that. I just said, everything in my life has prepared me for this moment. That's my favorite feeling for a class. I call it showtime. I learned that from performing artists. They say, doesn't matter what time of day it is, night class, morning class, it's showtime. And I always say to my students, Manitoba, you got to give everybody their money's worth. You're getting your money's worth today because I'm ready to go. But yeah, it's preparation. So how many people do we have wandering around doing a few visual pictures and think, oh yeah, I do that?
Yeah,
it's so much more than that. And if you want to learn about it, we should have probably Crystal here. I've worked with numerous performers who have had life-threatening conditions, and this is the skill more than anything that saved their life. Mm-hmm. It saved their life. It made their treatments effective. One of them had a bad case of lupus and a kidney disorder, and she came into my office one day and she was down. So what's going on? She said, well, I got my blood tests, and they're not good. They're not as good as I wanted. And so I said, Ashley, God, you should be so happy just to be here. You're amazing, Yeah, whatever. And I said, the other thing, and me, I'm straight from. I said, I think you're starting just to hope. You're hoping, not believing. Marches right out of my office, rolls back in with the blood test 10 days later, dramatically improved. It's undeniable that psychology affects physiology and vice versa.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the sooner we realize that and we manage both aspects, the healthier, happier we stay, and the better we perform.
Well, the more you understand about stress and the mechanisms of stress and the way they affect your physical well-being, this is something we were speaking about on Friday, it becomes so clear, the connection between your mental state and your physical well-being. It's great what you were talking about, because what I frequently do, for example, if I'm about to play in a concert hall I've never been in before, is again, find pictures of the hall from the perspective of the stage looking out, and in all my visualizations, I will imagine myself in that hall playing and feeling the way I want to feel. And this takes us into the next point, pre-performance focusing, because one thing, for example, that I did here 4 years ago when I was preparing for the competition, and I hadn't done a competition in so many years, and I felt that I need to use every tool at my disposal to make sure I do this well, I not only imagined myself on stage, but I imagined myself backstage before going on stage, feeling confident, feeling like this is a festival that I'm just going to, present what I love to the audience. So I really rehearsed every stage of the process, not only the playing, but actually how I want to be feeling, what state I want to be in, not only on stage, but before as well. And it's, I think, a very important point what you were saying, that we have to be prepared for a wide range of emotions, a wide range of thoughts. We can even practice getting through a performance well, even if some of our thoughts might be annoying, or you can actually mentally rehearse screwing something up and then recovering very well, because it's also a mental skill to be able to keep a high level, even if something didn't go the way you wanted it to. One danger with all these kinds of visualizations is that you get so stuck in one particular kind of way of how things might go, that if they don't, then you think that everything's just going to disintegrate now. But that's one really important thing you have to learn to avoid, and that can be applied to any other situation as well. If you have a very clear idea of how you want something in your life to go, and it doesn't seem to be going that way at the start, that doesn't mean you completely kind of lose any sense of belief in the process.
What do you most want to know when a speaker comes out? The most thing you most want to know is that I'm happy to be here. That's what you want to know. That's the number one preventative strategy for performance problems. Love what you're doing. So if you're a speaker, love what you're doing, people are going to feel it, and then they're comfortable. I'm glad I'm here. So look what you started, with a mindset due to some basic preparation that made you happy to be there. And sometimes you can have fun with people, I love it when people like Nicolas they make every effort to introduce me and say all the nice things about me. And I said, well, that's great, Nicolas, but I'm the least famous person in our family. And everybody laughs, It's true. I got a wife that's been to 2 Olympics. My kids, one's got 3 Olympic medals, 3 World Junior Championships. I married the right girl.
I should have said that in your introduction. The greatest achievement here was good life choices. Cal, I'd like to come to such an important concept here when we come to pre-performance focusing, and a very amorphous and mysterious one. It's like the holy grail that we just try to catch whenever we can. Yeah. The zone. Yeah. Getting into the zone. And we have different approaches for it, and I have a couple of things to say about the topic, but I'd like to open the floor here and say, so what are your main approaches for getting in the zone?
I mentioned it in our session Tuesday. I picked it up from the best coach I was ever around, and he had an ability to sense when people weren't as focused as they needed to be. And we're all prone to this. We have this big brain, and for whatever reason, it tends to want to go back and wants to go ahead. We're worrying about things in our past and problems we've had or whatever, and we got a tougher component there or whatever. And he would go through this little exercise with us, and I could not believe how he would change our group and focus our group to one thing that mattered this afternoon. And he did it by going through, here's what we did to get here. This is what our part of our past, that we accomplished things, came together, we got the right people here finally, we got to do this and that and whatever. And you're like, so much for that. And he goes, well, look at that head. We got this coming up, a chance to be that, a chance for a medal here, blah, blah, whatever it is. Oh, yeah, that's there. That's over there. Now, only one thing we can do anything about this afternoon, Mexico, 3 o'clock. Howard, are you ready to speak Spanish and warm up so that we know what we're ready for the yapping, I mean, whatever. But you see what he did? We get trapped by cognitive because we're taught that way, we operate that way, we think we're smarter. I think perceptually, for sure, horses, dogs, and elephants are better than we are because they don't OD on cognitive. So the job that he's talking about is pre-performance, is to let go of the past, let go of the future, and get into the moment.
But what's really interesting about this technique is that instead of telling yourself, don't think about the past, don't think about the future, just be in the moment, what you're actually doing first is actually addressing those head on. First saying, okay, so this is everything that happened until now. Yeah. This is everything that's coming up. I gave those topics their due. Yeah. I paid my respects to those issues. Now I can set them aside. Because by trying to repress your thoughts about these issues, the past and the future, it'll only make them stronger in your mind. Yeah. So actually looking at them head on, saying, okay, this is how I got here, this is what's coming up, then, those topics relax.
Yeah. And the other technique that's part of it, and if you watch a lot of better players, athletes, when they play the national anthem, they stare. And they stare at a dot, or they stare at the flag or something. And you pick a spot on the wall right now, or a spot in the room, and sit and just fixate on it and stare and stare and stare. And as you relax and stare at that dot, you start to notice more and more of the peripheral vision around you. You're creating, by slowing your mind down and giving a simple task of looking at a dot, you're starting to see a bigger piece of your whole world. And it's a simple technique, and then Wayne Gretzky will say it's over, and he's into the game, reading and reacting to the game. So focusing is a very important skill, and I agree with this. We're going to talk about emotions, and repression and denial doesn't work. Repression and denial causes more problems than it does help. So you got to be honest about feelings, and you got to have something like that in a constructive way. We're good. We're good because we did all this. We're good because we did all this. Now we can play. Yeah, we can play.
This staring exercise is fascinating. I recently came across another article about this very same topic, and I think they sometimes call it tennis eye. You see tennis players before the set is about to begin, and you just see the concentration in their eyes just kind of zone in on a spot, which doesn't even seem to be the other player, but they are just taking a moment to clear their mind in this way, and it's just very interesting to see
With
the science behind this.
like volleyball is one of the ones that's really, and tennis. Rally sports are great to learn refocusing, because you got to refocus after every rally if you're any good. And one of the things I noticed is when your team loses a point, they're slower at refocusing than when they win. When they win, they pump it, and they get right into getting ready for the next play, the return of serve or the spike. But when they drag it out, and they're just doing a last-minute thing, and it's not good enough. And then that's why it snowballs. Rally sports snowball, because you didn't get prepared in time. So we had a thing, I call it the 16-second solution. Like, if you're halfway through it and you haven't got into the prep, you're not going to be ready. And tennis players are amazing. I don't know how they do it sometimes, how they refocus after losing 3 or 4 points in a critical match, and they'll do that routine and come out and give the best shot they've ever made.
Well, I mean, the same principle can be applied to anything else. And what we were talking about, this idea of regrouping mentally if something went wrong, for example, in a performance. Again, let's say you're giving a speech and you stumbled or you said something you weren't meant to say. If you can practice in your mind getting back your concentration and focus as soon as possible, this will really make a difference, so that one error will not derail the whole performance. Because you won't be judged on one error, but if one error means you cannot keep your professionalism for the rest of the presentation, then you're in trouble, of course. This is such a really important part of all of this.
I guess I'd add there, Nicolas, that when I remember at the '84 Olympics in LA, looking at the emotions, and we're going to talk about the emotions. And what you're saying really is, I don't like the idea of preparing too much for things that'll go wrong, but I agree with you. You rehearse the response to a challenge. And when you've done it, you don't have to rehearse it to everything. But if you have like a
protocol,
a particular, for me, it's embarrassment. I hate embarrassment. So if I imagine that and see a solution to it, I'm pretty much go. I can handle anger, fear, whatever. So I think what you're saying is great. As part of the preparation, it's not just all positive. You need to trigger your response to some feelings that could be created by the context, by yourself, whatever, and be able to play through them and maintain a high level.
Absolutely. Well, this brings us to our next question, the idea of thoughts and emotions, of course, because this is, I guess, the big kahuna today. So we have a lot to talk about here.
Yeah, it is. It's big. And I mentioned it last. I apologize to you as a professional in psychology. The field of psychology has let us down. This is the most important topic in psychology, and there's the least good practical literature on it. Still, after all these years of people studying emotions and how they affect us. So my main source is a guy named Bob Vallerand from the University of Montreal. And he did a multivariate analysis of all the studies that had been done in emotion. And he concluded there are 7 basic emotions that we all experience virtually every day, certainly every week. And I looked at the list and I said, this is pretty much on. I think this is really good stuff. I use it a lot. And so in preparation, if I detect things, well, we're into it a bit. So the 3 that we have the most trouble with are fear, anger, and guilt. Everybody thinks they're negative. What would you do without fear, anger, and guilt? You'd never get ready for anything. Fear means get ready for something. Anger means fight for what you think is right. Guilt means help people that you care about. We have those emotions because of evolution. And they've been functional for thousands of years. And so you got to start turning some of that stuff around and saying, and fear is that way. If you say, I'm feeling a little scared, as soon as you say it, it starts to disappear, like you're mobilizing. But so if there are things like that, as he said, you need to be ready for those feelings. And the transition one, everybody's worried about, is sadness. It's one of the 7 fears. You know what? It's a recovery emotion. How did the slaves in America survive the world they lived in? Blues music. Blues music. Blues music. Therapeutic. go through hell in a basket every day and come back, go again the next day. I love blues music now. I had one assistant coach who had every kind of music going in his bag, and we'd always listen. But so it's not a problem, and so I've tried to help more people now about loss, because if you deny it or repress it, it's not a good deal. You got to grieve, whether you've lost a point, a game, or a partner, whatever. You need to grieve as deeply and meaningfully as you can. And when you do it, and you do it well, guess what happens? You become grateful. Grateful to be alive, grateful for things you've had, and grateful about your future. So it's kind of the middle one when I looked at the list. And the others are surprise, interest, and the other one's going to come to me in a minute. But
Joy?
Happiness, you're right. Happiness, thank you. Hey, I told you he knows more about this stuff.
Yeah.
But, you know, so those are the so-called happy ones. Surprise can be either. But I like to put it in the positive area, because if you get good at surprises, you embrace them and you're good at them and you're better than other people. That's what best performers do. They handle surprises better. So I think that one weighs things to being, you know, more positive than we think. Happiness and interest are healthy emotions, but I've seen athletes at the Olympics get interested in the opening ceremonies, or the you know, Lionel Richie singing in the square and forget about their competition. You know, you can get too happy and not be able to perform. You can get too interested in so that's why you got to go back to some of the things we just talked about, being able to focus and enjoy those things, but come back to focus. But the main thing about emotions is learning to accept them, because they're there for a good reason. And I addressed a conference at Williamsburg, Pennsylvania, the same one I told you about, and we had about 600-700 people, educational psychologists here, clinical psychologists here. I said, I got to get their attention. So I said, you know what? I said, good friends do a better job than all of you. Woo! That got a little bit of a reaction. What does a good friend do? A good friend, you're having bad feelings. Oh, I can imagine how you feel. I can imagine how you feel. As soon as somebody that you know and care about says, I can understand how you feel, you're on your way to recovery. Somebody else validated that feeling. It's okay to have it. Maybe it's inevitable to have it. And you end up talking, let's go for a run, or let's go have a drink. Let's talk about maybe reinterpreting it. Maybe it wasn't as bad as you thought. And away you go counseling. But stuffy counselors don't even do some of that stuff. So, yeah, I think it's just really important to know those basic emotions, know that we experience them every day. And with these little guys that I have in daycares for 27 years, they're better than all of us in that stuff. They're angry on an instant. They're scared in a minute. They're guilty in a moment. And I said, my worst one is a variation of guilt, which is embarrassment. They're happy as that in a flash. They are interested in things. They recover from a sad moment in a fraction of what we need. I don't know what we're doing to our kids. We're screwing them up. We got a lot more problems with this stuff in the older part of our population than we do in children.
I mean, this was all so interesting, and I think some of the practices that can help enhance this kind of, well, on the one hand, awareness of our own emotions, I think is very important, because sometimes we don't even realize what we're feeling. So I guided some of these practices on Thursday, for example. You can look these up on the video. I won't repeat them given time constraints, but one very important thing is to get used to looking inside with body scans, for example, just to become more familiar with one's own internal physiology. And then one can identify those physical patterns in the body that can lead to certain emotions and feelings. You realize that you have some tightening in your chest or tingling, and then you realize, okay, this is telling me something about the emotional state I am in. But what you were saying, identifying what emotion that you have is such an important first step. And what is great for this kind of thing also is the meditative practice of noting. Has anyone tried noting before? Also, well, I mean, I guess I could do a very quick guided demonstration of this. Okay, well, let's just do a very quick 2-minute one then. Okay, let's just get comfortable in our chairs. And we can close your eyes if you like. And if you just move your attention to the breath, and we breathe as we demonstrated before in the abdomen, just take a couple of mindful breaths. And soon you'll definitely notice that something is going to distract you. There might be a sound you hear, or a thought, or maybe a pain in your leg. So whatever pops into your mind, say a word about that. Let's say pain, or tingling, or this guy's voice, which is really annoying while I'm trying to meditate, or laughter, or whatever it is. And if you just get used to labeling whatever pops into your mind, and after each one return to the breath, and you can keep noting the breath, saying in on the in-breath, and out on the out-breath. And you just keep saying in, out. And any distraction that comes up, just make sure to label it as far as possible. And then you'll start to notice emotions like, oh, I feel anxiety maybe, or fear, or annoyance, or joy. So every time you just notice something, make a note of it. It will make this process of awareness much more conscious and clear. Anything that comes up, just make a note of it, and once you've acknowledged it, just return to the breath with the continued noting of in and out. Okay, so that's just a very short demonstration. We can come out of the meditative state. You could do this for a half hour or 1 hour, of course, but this kind of thing, just getting into that state and really becoming aware and conscious of anything that you notice and giving it a label and then returning to the breath is just a very, very good way to refocus this awareness to your internal state, whether it's to thoughts or emotions. And being forced to put a label to them makes it all that, much more concrete. And then once you get used to this, then you can relax having to have a very specific label for everything. But at the start, doing something like this really can create a sensitivity. So this is very helpful. Yeah.
No, I think this is really important. And if you want to start to understand, you need to get yourself a little biofeedback machine.
Fitbit.
It'll tell you real quick when you're getting more tense and when you're more relaxed or whatever. So my two favorite tools as a sensitizer are get a good CD that just, when you're done, you're just like, you're melted. I'm like, God, I didn't know I could do that. And I was a mess before. And biofeedback, the same thing. You think you're not trouble at all. As soon as you get on it, you can tell there's too much static going on here. And again, if you want experts, go back to children. We were at the National Coaching Seminar one year, and my son was about seven, and he's a pretty good athlete, and but when he got on the biofeedback machine, he got it down a bit, and then it'll come up again. So he was having feelings or thoughts of interfering a bit. But we reinforced him. He's doing fine. The 3-year-old girl gets on there. We didn't give her any instructions. She says, just bring the tone down. Like that. Feelings just, oblivious to them with her response to this simple task of bring the tone down on this little machine. So I agree. Most of us have no idea what we're carrying. We carry a lot of baggage. And I spoke at a mental health fundraiser, and a lot of the data is showing that mental health problems, 70% of them are traced to childhood trauma. So I asked the crowd at 500 people, is there anybody here that hasn't experienced any trauma? I never saw a finger lift. So we have all had trauma of some kind or felt it, and we are all vulnerable. And some of us are more lucky than others with what we've been able to do with it.
Absolutely.
And how we've been able to either replace it or shape it or accept it so that we can be who we are. And that's one of the things that you can come back to when you think you've lost a little perspective is like just who you are. I mean, Charles Schulz, the cartoonist, he had a saying, "Be yourself, everybody else is taken." And we do learn a lot from others, but in the end, you have to be you. And when you are, and here's a little story about it. Martini and Underhill at the Olympics in Sarajevo, the best in the world at the time, by quite a bit. But they made one mistake in their preparation. They trained a whole time for several months, but they didn't compete. And they got into the Olympic final, and she tripped, and it cost them a medal, and they were devastated. And I was doing some work with them, but also with hockey. And the coach, Louis Stone, came and said, "Well, what are we going to do? Like, we're getting out of here soon, and we got World Championships in 3 weeks." I said, "Well, I got this little instrument that I use quite often, test of attentional interpersonal scale, that just reflects back what most of your attributes are." And then I said, "I've watched them. They're good people. I know some things. We can add that to it." I said, "Get them to do that and send it to me in the mail, and I'm going to fire it right back to you." So he got these little reports, and he gave them to Paul and Barbara. And they read them, and they see a little smile get on their face. And then they exchanged them. You read mine, I'm reading yours. You could just feel, he said, the burden flying off them. And he said she did one more thing. She got an old pair of skates that she was comfortable in. Mm-hmm. And in Ottawa, their performance, you're supposed to have some decorum in the arts. You don't cheer in the middle of a presentation. They started cheering halfway through their performance. It was so amazing. So amazing. They couldn't contain themselves. And they were so into it, so much in the zone. It didn't matter what was going on. They just nailed it. I mean, I was so happy for them.
It's fantastic. An incredible experience. This brings us to, your discussion of trauma and how we look back at the performance brings us to our final topic, reviewing, and resetting after a performance and our perspectives on things that have just happened either in the recent past or further back.
Yep.
How do we recover if things didn't go well, or if things went well, then how do we integrate this experience as effectively and constructively as possible for the next performance, for the next competition, for the next challenge that we have?
Yep. Well, I'm going to give you my favorite little short-term dynamic one. My last 25 years of my career have been virtually every client, overload and exhaustion, under recovery has been part of the challenge. 25 years of it. And so you get pretty good at helping them with it, but it's big. But we had this athlete on the basketball team, and I watched him just in training, and he'd miss a shot. Everybody missed a shot once in a while. But I noticed him, like, after he missed a shot, he couldn't wait to get the ball. Mm-hmm. Like, give me the ball. So I said, God, that's amazing, Till. How did you learn that? He said, well, I had older brothers, and if I didn't believe, I wasn't getting anywhere with them, So he said, I learned that. But he said, more importantly, Cal, I shoot 90% from there. What's his reaction to mistake? Next 9 are going in. Mm-hmm. The next 9 are going in. And we played in the World Championship in Edmonton. He sat through a game against USA that we found a way to win and got into the final against Yugoslavia, the world champion. And our young team started to struggle a little bit in the first half, and Coach sent Till out. He'd been sitting, a shooter. He'd been sitting for a game and a half. Came out, rolled on the floor, took a shot, and missed. I don't know anybody in the building that's betting a nickel on him now. Mm-hmm. Next 4 are drained, right through the middle. He has a layup. He pulls up and strokes it right in their face. Mm-hmm. So if this guy's a car salesman, he sells a lot of cars, because when everybody else has lost 8 sales in a row, he's pumped, because next guy is going to buy a Volvo. Whatever. Life is like this. And if you learn those lessons, you're going to be incredibly more resilient, because mistakes, and medicine had to learn this because they were denying and repressing them rather than sort of accepting them and going with what you learned, And so Kurt Tribble in medicine said his debriefing routine is remember and forgive. He says, I can't forgive myself till I remember what I could have done. So he's back into imagery and visualization, and he sees and feels that. None of it's easy, he said, but I can deal with something that went wrong. I have a chance to forgive myself. And then he said, my obligation is to use that to help others. And that's how he functions. So, yeah, I think you need to develop habits to be resilient in the short term, and everybody likes performers and athletes that are resilient. It's very impressive because most of us are not as good as we'd like. But the number one thing preventing people from being that is under recovery in general. Mm-hmm. They're overtrained or under recovered. And, fitness is a state as well as a set of capacities. And when your state is not good, your capacities are masked. When you're tired, they're not as good. They're not as good. So, I dealt with athletes who had a whole year of under recovery, struggling to get results. Came to the cottage for 4 or 5 days, hung out, deep relaxation, 14 hours of sleep a night, paddle around the bay. She said, I got to go for my year-end test in Canmore. Go, girl, go. Goes after the 5 days of complete and utter rest and has the best physical performance ever on her testing. And she'd had the worst year. She needed that in November, So there is a ton of people under recovered. And there's a spa, a European spa that is near us in a park setting. It's a beautiful place. And that's a good place to go if you want to know what it feels like to be relaxed, because it's amazing. There's at least 100 cars there every day. Pools and saunas and tapes, toilets and whatever. $100 a day. We've got it. It's awesome. It's like, go and find out. But you don't have to go there every day to learn to relax or recover. It should be part of your makeup. Mm-hmm. And the same guy, Tribble, told me, he said, Cal, there's 2 ways to the operating room. He's a cardiothoracic surgeon. This way's the back way, just white walls and maybe a couple of garbage cans or whatever, and then booming them in. This way here goes out up on the 2nd floor, and there's glass. There's plants all through the lobby. There's a piano, and often somebody is playing. He says, I've timed it. It takes me 7 to 8 seconds longer to get to the operating room going that way. If it's not a red alert, I go this way every time because I'm a better surgeon when I get there. Recovery, momentary. You've got to have micro recovery and block recovery to stay happy and healthy in today's world.
What a fantastic note to wrap up these 5 points on. And I'd like to open the floor now to audience questions regarding optimizing performance and making sure that we are well equipped to deal with what we encounter in life. I have a few more questions to follow up on, but and we also actually have a reception following this with some sweets and drinks. But yes, it would be nice to just.
What would be your opinion or experience, perhaps, with the use of low-dose beta blockers for non-athletic, presumably, piano, for example?
I haven't had my experience. I work with shooters at the Olympics in Atlanta, and there was a lot of speculation about, whether they were being used legally or illegally in a sport which required such relaxation. Also in biathlon, I've worked with biathletes where it's exhaustive physical and then fine motor shooting. So it's just, it's a strategy that obviously can have an effect. I would say it just has to be under the guidance of medical people that know whether it's really necessary or whether there's alternative there. Is just a quick note on it. They had a shooter that got he's a very young child. He was 14, 15. He got in a motorcycle accident. He got bad burns, 2/3 of his body. His mom called me and said he wants to meet with you because you talk relaxation and imagery. I went to see him, talked with him, took a little biofeedback machine. Everybody in his ward was on medication except him. He was using the deep breathing and the imagery, dealing with the brine baths, and the things were incredibly stressful and inventing. better than people on medication. So, like Crystal, be careful assuming that one thing is the answer for everybody. Sometimes there are other ways to do it. But good point.
I mean, I hear about it being quite prevalent in the performing arts world, and
for public speaking and in many situations where people are nervous, these are blocks to the sympathetic nervous system.
Sure.
As opposed to stimulating the parasympathetic.
Yeah.
But that being said, one does need some aspects of what the sympathetic nervous system gives you in order to be focused and collect one's energy. Because one thing we were talking about on Friday is that, the physical symptoms of pressure and stress do not mean that one will not perform well. There isn't a strong correlation between physical stress and performance, but there is a very strong correlation between cognitive stress and performance. You can be feeling the very same symptoms, the shaking hands, sweating palms, a fast heart rate, but perform fantastically. But if you are interpreting those symptoms as, oh, I'm going to screw this up, then you probably will. So blocking the sympathetic nervous system and any symptoms of that form of activation at all costs might not be the most conducive, because there's a reason why we have these responses. That rush of adrenaline does help us in performance if we can harness it well. And taking us into a state where it feels like we're just relaxing on the beach, that isn't actually the state in which you might be best equipped to deal with the pressures that you have on stage. So it seems like a good short-term solution for extreme anxiety, but that isn't necessarily perhaps the best way to condition your performance and condition your state for effective performance, because you need some of that sympathetic activation as well to have that focus, to have that control, to let time tick more slowly so that you can think more quickly in the moment. So I think that being well prepared for a performance is a much more multifaceted process rather than simply being as calm as possible. And having that expectation is neither reasonable or realistic, and neither desired, I think. So that would be my thoughts on medication. I think that, yes, Earl.
I hope I can ask this question concisely. Looking at the concept of recovery.
Yes.
While you're performing,
Yeah.
In many ways, it's a constant state of recovery.
Yeah.
As with any of us in business, I mean, in my particular business, I'm faced with a brutally fast business where decisions and actions need to be executed quickly. And the reality is that 95% of what I try to achieve by industry standard is not going to work. I know that it will be, in essence, a failure. So I'm wondering about recovering on the fly. You can see what I mean.
Absolutely. So if the microphones didn't pick it up because you're far away, the question is recovering on the fly in the face of repeated, what you might consider failures. I mean, one way to reframe it, of course, is that not to expect that you will succeed 100% of the time, of course, and not see those 95% failures as failures, and just think that, okay, that is the status quo and whatever I get is just a plus. But of course, let's say in sport, if you miss 95% of the shots, that's a kind of there's a different kind of situation, of course.
Well, the best story I've heard is Paul Kerr, Dr. Paul Kerr, the head of ENT surgery at HSC in Winnipeg. He said, "Operating room is my sanctuary. It's my sanctuary. It's the office I can't handle." It's all recovery for him, doing surgery. He loves it. And I had a student one time. His dad was one of the most wealthiest business people going. And he stayed in the office till he died. And he's 95. He's there every day. It was the best place for him to be. He loved what he was doing. And it's still the single biggest piece of advice. Sometimes we distinguish between kids and pros and Olympic. The single lesson from my 50 years is love what you're doing. If you love what you're doing, you're going to prevent 90% of the problems that most of us have. And clearly, by the sound of that recovery, you need to have some outside things to let your system recover from a barrage of challenges like that. Because even when you love it, and this can be a problem, if you love it too much, then you become obsessed with that, and it becomes another stress. But I think if you can label, if you're doing what you love doing and you're in a place you want to be, but I counsel people always that aren't, I say, get out of there. Go somewhere where they appreciate you and you're going to love what you're doing, and you'll be twice as good as you are now. Don't mess with it, because working somewhere where it's not motivating, it's not healthy. You gotta. There's too many places you could go. So, but I think it's. I just loved it. I use that term all the time. So I love what I do. I had great opportunities. Sometimes I still got tired because I was doing so many things, and I'm trying to keep up with this guy. I'm living through it all again.
Yeah, well, I definitely pile it on too much and need to learn a few lessons in spreading things out. But these perspectives I think are so important in terms of having this emotionally, positive approach to what we do. But in terms of recovery, specifically, I would just do a zoomed in and zoomed out approach. One is during the performance, and another is from performance to performance, because you can see both of these as two arenas of how things might play out. We were talking earlier about this idea of being prepared for things to go wrong and recovering from them. So when you do mental preparation, the idea is not, I'm going to get through the Liszt sonata without playing a wrong note. No, well, it's great if you do, but it's also worth being prepared for something going wrong and then having a protocol to recover and come back to the center after that. The first thing you need to have in your mindset is not to expect that it will go perfectly, not have that as your goal. Because if you do, and it doesn't go that way, then you'll be derailed. So the first expectation, the first idea is to manage your expectations and then know how to refocus once something goes wrong. And I think one really important part of this actually is changing our relationship to our thought patterns. Because let's say something goes wrong in life or in the middle of a performance, and then inevitably you might have this rush of negative thought patterns, which will happen. You screwed up. The rest of the performance is going to be bad. Whatever. How many of us have sat down, maybe meditated, and just observed our thoughts? Just observe what's going on. Yeah. If you haven't, please do. Because if you just calm down and observe your thoughts, it will be like opening your front door to the most boring lunatic who does not stop talking in complete paranoia about everything that could and might go wrong in the most outlandish ways. That's just how it is. And we were speaking about this on Friday. This is how we evolved to be, because on the savannas, when we were evolving, we had to make sure we weren't going to be eaten by a lion or be trampled by a rhino. We had to be paranoid to survive. But this is not constructive and helpful in the current circumstances. If we know this about our thoughts, then we stop taking them so seriously. If we play a wrong note, or something goes wrong, we miss a jump, or a performance doesn't go that well, and we are, confronted by this deluge of negative thinking, the first step is not to take it so seriously. Just know that we've evolved to be like this. This is not reasonable. This is not rational. This is not helpful in this moment. Of course, if you can then, in the next stage, move to making sure that you're able to focus more on positive emotions and counteract that, great. But the first step is just not to take those thought patterns so seriously, and not think also that because you're having these thoughts, it will knock you out of the zone. One thing I find in performance psychology is this stress about being in the zone. It's like, if something isn't going quite to plan, or I'm starting to have some thoughts and I'm not totally immersed, that means I am not in a state to perform well. And that only makes things worse. We start stressing about stressing. We should start having the perspective that, some things might go wrong and I might not be feeling so great about it, and that's part of the process. And that doesn't mean I cannot continue to perform well, because I can have that sense of perspective and distance to those emotions and to those thought patterns. So once we start managing our expectations and have a more relaxed approach to the response that we might have, we are much quicker in recovery. We are able to return to a state of the neutral zone much more quickly. And again, having the same kind of perspective in the longer term, not expecting that every performance, every deal we try to make, every attempt at raising money is going to go the way we want it to, will also temper our expectations and will make us much more resilient in the long run. So, you know, on these two.
Let me tell you your story, just one recovery story, just to get a feel for it. It's the other pandemic under recovery, and almost everybody is suffering some way. And again, because it accumulates so gradually, you don't realize how bad you are. I had a medical resident completing 5th year residency, and of all things, she was trying to do critical care and emerge at the same time, which is like insane. And I detected almost immediately, I said, "You're this close to burnout, girl. Why don't you come to the cottage and escape for a few days and see what some recovery would do?" I said, "Well, how much time do you have?" She said, 37 and a half hours. I said, "Thank you. Now, I want you to talk to your husband, and I want you to relax on the way out there, because if we only have 37 and a half hours, we got to make the most of it." And so she said, "Let's do it." And so they arrived, and Lauren said, "Oh, God," she was like crashed in the car. She was more relaxed and lucid than I've seen her in a long time. So we had a nice visit and a bite to eat and a glass of wine, and she crashed 14 hours, deep sleep. Woke up, paddled around the bay a little bit, you know, and then the next night, same thing, 14 more hours, a little bit more active. But the next day, like 37 hours was up, and she said, "I'm leaving at 5:30, I'm on call." I said, "Well, I'll get up and I'll see you out." "No, you don't have to." I said, "I'm getting to see you off. I want to see how you're doing." I don't have the medical qualifications, but I have a very, very successful scale for measuring, you know, people's state. I look in their eyes, and if there's lights in there, I think they're getting somewhere. If it's like deadpan, you can almost see it. So anyway, she first, after the first 14 hours, she came out and said, "Oh, God, Cal, I heard the birds sing. I haven't heard the birds sing in years. Well, maybe it should slow down, you know? Oh, do this and that, paddle around a little bit." And then, you know, when she was going to go, she says, "Well, what do you think?" You know, she's looking for something. I said, I'm looking in her eyes, and I said, "Well," I didn't forget to tell you, there's one other thing I offer to do when they come out. I can look after that instrument that you have in your ear all the time. Can give me that for a week? Your friggin' cell phone? Give me that. You don't need that for 4 days or whatever. People are so addicted to that. It's a constant stress source of some whatever. So she was okay with it, but she threw it in a drawer and got on with what we needed. Good food, good rest, and there. So I look at her and say, "I don't think it's enough, but I think it'll do." She smiled and said, "Yeah, I think it'll do." And within hours, she was on a flight into the north, an emergency trip to find a patient, bring them back, and back in business. She takes every 3 to 4 months, she takes a block holiday now. She learned how close she was, how resilient you can be, but how disciplined you have to be to get it. And I think I told you, AMA study, 750 physicians' suicides in the US of A, recorded in 2018 before COVID. Oh my God, that's the ultimate tragedy, human and professional tragedy. So the environment's got to get better, and we all got to get healthier. We can't afford that.
Again, it's so much about a sense of perspective about all this. And yes.
Yeah, you can't be a good doctor if you're at that level of burnout.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no.
So that's why people complain.
Yeah. No, it's the simplest things that have meant the most. And Faisal, who's now the head of critical care, he said, "Cal, you told me about staying with the process. So now I chunk my treatments. I do this, and then I do this, and then I do this. And when I'm done, you know, I look up, and I've done a better job for my patient and a better job for me because I wasn't worrying about outcomes, you know." And I studied an athlete, Ingemar Stenmark from Sweden, most amazing athletic record, I believe, in the history of mankind. He's won so many World Cup races and everything. And he'd be at the top of the hill, rehearsing a bit. He'd attack his race, go through, and he'd have won a downhill race and a World Cup by a second one. He'd only win by 100th normally. He'd spin right by the finishing area and well by the audience to a quiet spot, and here he is going. What's he doing? He's doing an even better race in those conditions. So, what's the lesson? He won 87 World Cup gold medals, 3 Olympic gold medals. It's just unbelievable record. But he never worried about outcomes till well after he'd seen even something better. And Bill Walsh from San Francisco 49ers, 3 NFL championships. He wrote a book. It's not a slogan. It's not a chapter. It's not a paragraph. It's the whole damn book. It said the results take care of themselves. The results take care of themselves. 3 NFL championships, one of the hardest things in the world to do. So, again, why do we go back our head rather than just focus? Because we're human. Big brain wants to get too active, and we do ourselves in.
Well, on the subject of important books, we have some of Cal's that he has brought so graciously with him from Winnipeg, and they are here on the 2 little tables behind you, and they are complimentary. So if you haven't picked one up, please do so on your way out, 1 per group preferably, so that there's enough for everyone. It's so kind of you to bring them, and so kind of you to be here with us.
Well,
I think that will be it for today and for Mind Over Music. This has been such a fantastic conversation, so thank you so much, Cal. And fortunately, these things are all recorded, so they are a resource we can keep coming back to. Many thanks again to the Azrieli Foundation, to the University of Calgary, and the Hotchkiss Brain Institute for supporting us in this venture. It's been such a joy to join you in these explorations of these interesting themes. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the competition, and see you again. Thank you.